I'm going to talk about sort of, as you see from the title, so coming back to the sort of my sort of pet sort of, research on word recognition in reading Finnish, and particularly sort of, how you recognize compound words, and sort of, I'm going to present a series of 3 studies that we've done. 2 of them are already published. Some of you might have come across them. The most recent one is in preparation, and for the most recent one, I present sort of the published studies. Sort of like as a background. So so because they all, I believe, link nicely, fairly nicely together. But before I start out, as you will see from the citation, so really this work that I'm presenting is collaborative effort with Raymond Peril. He's from my university, and Sandy Polacek from UMass. So I have had a long-standing collaborative relation with these guys, and I haven't counted the number of publications, but we have several publications together, maybe in some various combinations. So really, this isn't really my work, but I'm happy to be involved in these. So I'm happy to present this work to you. So also, happy to, if you, whenever you like to challenge me or ask a question, or sort of, you don't understand what I'm saying, so you can interrupt me. I'd rather, do the discussion on the fly rather than you don't have to wait until the very end. So we can of course do that too. But so I'm happy to take questions and comments on the way. Okay. So the starting point for the series of 3 studies that I'm going to present is sort of the parallel dual root model of compound word identification that we put forth by, with Sandy Polacek and Raymond Peril. So basically it's sort of, there are many versions of this kind. So this is one such kind, where basically it's sort of the model assumes that there are 2 routes to word recognition. When you're recognizing, trying to identify compound words that consist of at least 2 components. Dennis was already mentioning that in Finnish, as in German, as in Swedish, word compounding is very productive. You can actually put not more than just 2 components together to make up words. But we've done a little bit of studies with 3 constituent compounds, but I'm not going to talk about that. So everything that I'm talking about is sort of, has to do with 2 constituent compounds. So typically 2 nouns put together to make a word. Okay, so the model that we put forth is a very simple thing. So that the idea is that there are 2 routes into to lexical access, that you can use 2 routes to lexical access. One is sort of the whole word route, or the holistic route. So basically try to sort of access, process the entire word and sort of try to find in your mental lexicon the sort of the corresponding sort of entry. Sort of try using, not doing any decomposition, sort of by morphological decomposition, by trying to sort of tease apart what the components are. But at the same time, the idea is that, okay, there's another route also available, and that's sort of the morphological decomposition route. Basically, the idea that, okay, you just try to identify the components, and then by that we'll get the word. So that's sort of the idea, that these routes are parallelly in operation. So whichever is faster, that takes sort of over the identification process. Okay, but then the even more key to these these studies that I'm going to present this afternoon is sort of the idea that Raymond and I put forth about 10 years ago, and this is sort of what we call Sandy doesn't like the sort of the term, but we call the visual acuity principle. But basically, what it says is that that the balance between these two routes that are in operation in parallel is constrained by basically visual acuity, but more precisely by word length. The idea being simply that if you have a short compound, like front door, how many? 8 letters, right? Okay, fairly short. Not really. That can't be really short. Oh, by the way, maybe the shortest compound word that exists. At least the shortest I know of comes from Swedish, and it's O. Has 3 letters, and that's the name of Turku, my hometown in Swedish. And this letter is an A and little circle on top. That means river, and this B-O means like people. So it's a river people. So 3 letters, but basically a compound word, even though you don't really see that as a compound word. Okay. Anyhow, so sorry, distracted. But anyhow, so what I was trying to say that okay, so if you have a relatively short compound word, short enough that it's sort of once you fixate in the center of that, so most, if not all, the letters fall in within the fovea. So then all the letters, a lot of the letter identities are available for the holistic root to take over. That's basically the idea. You don't need decomposition if it's an existing compound word. You just try to use that code to access your mental lexicon. But if the word compound word is long enough so that not all the letters can be accessed and identified within a single fixation, that means that okay, then the decomposition route is likely to become an active player in the process. So that's basically the idea. I'm not going to present the data that led us to propose that, but now I'm actually presenting some stuff that we did more recently that was basically putting into further test this idea. So right, and then toward the end also talk about the other component of my talk is what happens when you make novel compounds. You just put nouns, existing nouns together to make a compound that you never seen before. So how do you make up the meaning? How early? How does the novelty kicks in, and how early it kicks in during the identification process? Okay. So a couple of years ago, we published a paper with Raymond. This was in experimental psychology. So that was meant to test directly this account that I just presented, and we had a set of long compound words, like about 12 letters, the average, and then a set of short compounds, average of 7 letters. But what we did was, we made use of a special feature in Finnish, where, in Finnish basically, and in German and Swedish the same thing. So when you make a compound word, you just put everything together. But there's some special cases where you put a hyphen in the constituent, the morpheme boundary. And that is, you have to have a hyphen when the last letter is a vowel, which plus it's the same vowel that the second component starts with. So otherwise it'll span the it makes it if you did not do that, so you would be misparsing. A lot of the times that's helpful for the reader to parse the sentence. Otherwise, the syllable boundary would span across the morpheme boundary, and that might and that's why we have to, everybody, I mean, when you write Finnish, I mean, with these, so you have to use the hyphen in these kind of compounds. So this is, this one is, literal meaning is music evening, like musical evening. And here we have another one that's a short one. So peli ilo, that would mean literally like, what would that be? You don't have, this is, I mean, you don't have this compound word, but I mean, like game pleasure, something like that. Here you have the sort of the corresponding concatenated, like this would be kesäsää, summer weather. That I think that would be, in English would be, I think, spaced compound. Maybe. Yeah, I think so. Anyhow, okay. But basically, what the idea was, I mean, to take existing compounds that were either hyphenated or concatenated and have them be, I mean, a set of set of short words, and so what we predicted on the basis of this visual acuity principle was that, I mean, the starting point was that the hyphenation is likely to encourage decomposition and processing because it sort of, I mean, makes visually salient the sort of the morpheme boundary. So maybe it's likely to sort of encourage sort of the, okay, so once you see that there are two components into this word, so maybe it sort of, I mean, activates very early the decomposition route. Okay, if it does so, I mean, it would mean that, I mean, the long words, because you have, I mean, for the short words, you have the holistic route available, and that would be the most viable, that would be the easiest way to do it. So if instead this hyphen encourages you to, I mean, use the other route, so that would actually slow down the identification of these short compounds, because then you would be using the one route that is more, I mean, it's more slow, and it's not, I mean, something that you will not be using otherwise. But whereas for the identification of long compounds, so I mean, you could sort of predict either no effect, because I mean the decomposition route would be the primary route anyhow, so maybe it doesn't help that much. But maybe you could also think that, okay, it might help because now you're segmenting the sort of you're signaling the boundary, so it might ease up sort of the decomposition route a little bit, because we have actually other data, not talking about that today, I mean, showing that, I mean, some segmentation cues does help the decomposition route for long compounds.
Okay. Jukka?
Yeah.
These predictions seem to suggest that the two routes, only one of the two routes can be engaged at a time, rather than operating in parallel?
No. I'm not sorry. I mean, it's the idea. The idea is that they do operate. I mean, simultaneous. But I mean, which one? I mean, the idea is that, I mean, of course, the holistic route would be. I mean, if you'd use that,
right,
that would be the faster, because I mean, because then you would have direct access to the lexicon. But I mean, for the decomposition route, you're just accessing first the first constituent, and then you make another fixation, and then you access the second constituent, and with that, I mean, with that, the whole.
I don't understand prediction A then, because it seems like the presence versus absence of a hyphen in the short compound words really shouldn't make a difference if you got the two mechanisms engaged in parallel, right? Because irrespective of whether the hyphen's there or not, it's short. Parallel route or the holistic route is really going to have an advantage.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Okay. So I mean, if they're completely parallel.
Right.
Okay.
If they're capacity constrained, so that as you engage one, you take away from the other, then the prediction might make sense.
Right.
But if they're completely parallel.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. That's true. Okay. So then, so it may be. I mean, I'm not sure what we're saying in the paper, but I mean, okay. But I take your point, because it's sort of that would mean that, I mean, I should maybe predict that, okay, so I mean, there is sort of like, I mean, a head start,
right,
for one of the two, and sort of, I mean, maybe sort of, I mean, okay, so if we sort of modify that so that the holistic route will get a head start with short compounds, whereas the other, I mean, the decomposition route would sort of take a head start, have a head start for the longer ones. But now, when you have a hyphen, so that might sort of, I mean, cue your, I mean, the reader into sort of using the decomposition route as sort of, I mean, as the default. Or
I think that makes sense.
Changing, yeah, that would be, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's not completely. If it were completely parallel, so you wouldn't predict this.
Right.
Because as you might guess, I mean, the what I'm going to present is going to be consistent with the these predictions. So.
Right.
Okay.
So just occurred to me. So you said in Finnish you have to write these hyphens for the.
If the two vowels and this of the same kind. Yeah.
So could it be, if people are used to seeing these words, that they could even process a word with a hyphen holistically if it's a very frequent word?
Without the hyphen, you mean?
Even with the hyphen, because they're just used to seeing it as a visual unit.
Oh, right. Yeah, but that would be against. I mean, sort of, I mean, the effect. I mean, that I'm going to present. Yeah, that's true. It is true. Yeah, if you're really used to seeing, I mean, yeah. Okay. So here's a list of things that we, I mean, controlled for. So we manipulated the sort of the length and the type, sort of hyphenated or concatenated. But then we all these. I'm not going to go into these, but we pretty, I mean, well, sort of, I mean, matched set of, I mean, compounds, and then. Well, I mean, I'm not going to give you a crash course on Finnish, but I just, I mean, point out, I mean, that what we did was sort of, I mean, we paired a concatenated, here's the concatenated target word with a hyphenated compound word separately for the long ones and the short ones. You can see here also sort of like the rough translation of these, but also another thing to note is that, okay, when for these pairs of sentences, so they were reading single sentences for comprehension silently. So I mean, for the pairs, so the first few words were identical, and so was the word n+1 after the targets, and then after that, so it diverged. So that was sort of, I mean, and plus this the first few words that were prior to the target, they were sort of, I mean, very neutral. So they did not constrain so the semantic meaning of the word at all. So like here, last week's could be anything, or here, after all, and so forth. So I mean, so yeah, so okay, so that was sort of the setup for the experiment. Okay, and I'm going to present two measures that, I mean, as you all know, that, I mean, eye tracking is with eye tracking you get all these measures, and you can I mean, do all kinds of analyses. But basically, I mean, and we did also that, but I'm showing you sort of the two basic results. I mean, I'm using something that we have sometimes used, and I think that sort of, I mean, has been a nice measure to use. I mean, what we call the sub-gaze duration. That's basically the gaze duration on the first component. So we just, separated out the first constituent and out of the second constituent, and we just, used as the area of interest, so the first component. So so that was an index of rather early effect. So what you see here is that hyphenation facilitates recognition for long compounds. So you do get an early effect. For hyphenation, a facilitative effect for long ones, nothing for the short ones at this point. But it seems that, okay, so once the default for long ones is sort of the segmentation, the decomposition route, so by signaling the boundary, you get a benefit very early on, okay? And then for the a little later effect, but still immediate in the sense that we're still, I mean, fixating on the word. So we're looking at the effect for the case duration. And now, same thing for the long one. So you continue to have this facilitation by hyphenation, but now you get a penalty for the short ones. So here. So okay, now sort of the hyphenated short compounds took longer to read than the non-hyphenated or concatenated compound. So there was a crossover interaction, and these differences were also separately significant. Okay. So for the later effect, hyphenation facilitates recognition for long compounds but inhibits it for short compounds. So
that's
it's
a really big effect, isn't it? But for the long words.
Oh, it's actually a huge effect.
Just staring at it going like it's more or less 150 milliseconds.
Yeah, it's actually, you're right. You're right, and this inhibitory effect is not a small one either.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's a large effect for the short words too, right? It's 100 milliseconds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about 100. Yeah. Yeah. True. So we believe that this pattern of results is compatible with the visual acuity principle I just put forth. So okay, so basically I've said this. Okay, hyphens facilitate the identification of long compounds as they help accessing the first constituent, and sort of help ease out, facilitate the decomposition route by visually signaling the morpheme boundary. But hyphens disrupt the identification of short compound words by encouraging sequential process in the case where simultaneous constituent processing, that is the holistic route, is viable. Yeah.
So when does the model start? So is the idea that every single word you look at, both of these routes begin, and then if it's a non-compound word, the morphological decomposition route just stops? Or is there a decision at some? How does the system identify it's a compound word in order for these two parallel routes to get going in the first place?
Oh, okay. I guess we assume in our theorizing that okay, once you notice that it's a long one, you better. You're not going to try to find a sort of match for the whole entire sequence of letters, but you just try to see what if there's something. If there's a component that I can start with. But whereas for the short ones, you sort of think that okay, because a lot of the short ones are monomorphemic, or they can be monomorphemic. So basically, you can sort of as a default think that okay, so perhaps it's like what Eric was sort of made me say that okay, so there'll be like a default for short ones. You try out the whole. You give a head start for the holistic route, and for the long ones you give a head start for the decomposition. Just by seeing the paraphilia, so that okay now I'm gonna see. Have to identify this long word. So okay, so roll up my sleeves and start working on this, and sort of basically sort of so what is what's there, what's in there. So basically. You're not. Okay, you had something else in mind.
No, I'm just checking. I understand. So you think that, although there might be some bias to one or the other,
right?
Judging by word length, both routes kick in at some point or other.
At some point. Of course, once you have for the long ones, once you have enough data for the components, of course they together sort of if there's an existing compound. So then you can access that on the basis of So actually I don't have the data here, but even for the long ones, you get signs of the whole word frequency effect kicking in during the sort of the second fixation. So it's little bit even for the first, sometimes, but it's like a 5 millisecond tiny. Sometimes it comes out significant, sometimes it doesn't. But I mean, reliably so. I mean, and during the second fixation. So we take that as evidence that okay, so you start out by the sort of the decomposition or by accessing the first constituent, but at some point very soon, so you get some idea of the second. Already maybe you have some idea of the second constituent during the first fixation, and that's sort of the evidence accumulating. So then you probably, you start trying to, at some point also try to activate the holistic via the holistic routes, or see if you have some entry in the mental lexicon for this set of letters. So that's basically the idea. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's possible that you try to figure out what the word is while you're still parafoveally processing it. So we did that.
You mean the sort of what type of word it is?
If it's a compound word or not.
Okay.
Essentially, we had this cowboy versus boy cow preview experiment.
Oh, remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so those were very short. So those
Okay.
were either 6-letter or 8-letter compound words. So words that are written together in English even. And with those we found that I believe it was the preview for the first constituent so availability of the preview for the first constituent had an effect even when it was shown in the second position in the
Yeah, I remember that.
in the preview. So it could be that, well, you're just trying to get whatever you can get from the entire word in the paraphobia as far as the word fits into the perceptual span. If it's a really long word, then just due to the limitations of the perceptual span, you're only going to process the first constituent. And then, based on what you've done in pre-processing, by the time you're actually fixating the word, you might actually have a good idea already if it's a compound word or not.
We tried once with Raymond, not this kind of preview effects, but simply looking at the fixation location as a function of the length of the first constituent. We simply had like very short first constituents and long first constituents, with the idea that okay, if you do a parafoveal morphological parse of the word, and secondly, if that affects your landing position, you should find a difference in landing positions, but we didn't find any. At least the landing position was not affected, but it's not sort of inconsistent what you said. But so that led me. I'm familiar with your study, but that was. Until so far, I've been sort of skeptical about sort of the how much of the morphological structure you can parse before. There's this Uyghur study that's sort of suggesting that that you can in fact sort of because they had these monomorphemic words and then three morpheme words, and then you get an effect in the landing position. We actually
It's an extreme case there, right? Ihab finds it a little bit in Arabic as well.
Oh, also okay.
Yeah, we find it in
Because
Arabic.
we're
as well.
trying. We're going to try out that in Finnish. That's actually I've got some money to do this. So yeah.
So I'll be very curious to see it in Finnish, because say, for instance, in Arabic, it's the
So you do find an effect in the landing position. Oh.
yeah, but the prefix is visually quite salient, right? Yeah.
Oh, it's a prefix. It's
Yeah.
a prefix.
It's the same with the Uyghur
Okay,
studies.
but Uyghur, now I think there's a suffix.
Yes, suffix,
They
yeah.
added suffixes to the end of the word.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yours was a prefix effect.
But the thing with Uyghur, when I asked Kliegel also when he was here and he was presenting part of it, is that it's not an even comparison. So if you add a lot of suffixes to it, my strong impression from the materials he presented and from reading the paper was that the value diminishes of the amount of information contained by a suffix.
Oh, I see.
So you add almost
Nothing.
almost nothing to them, and people, you might pick up on that.
Mm.
Now, the one thing I'm always puzzled by was that not necessarily the parafoveal processing, but the foveal processing even.
Mm.
So once you're actually on the word, I remember the study we did in 2010 where we compared a monomorphemic word and a compound word. And one of the most difficult things to explain there was we had a very, very quick, effective compound structure, thus that we had more serial processing of constituents in a compound word, no parafoveal and foveal effect within the first compound, and within a morphemic word, people immediately noticed that there was a misspelling.
Mm.
But how do people pick up on a compound structure
Mm.
so quickly? They must do like incredibly quickly that it could be a little bit parafoveal, obviously, but incredibly quickly. And it's one of those things I think where the data precedes the theory almost, where we don't have the theory yet about how people do it, but the data shows that people can do it. And I find it still very difficult to. Finnish is an interesting one because, in my opinion, my guess would be that if a Finnish person is confronted with a 14-letter word, then the default would be a compound word. It would be rare. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I mean, sort of presenting this idea that okay, so if you see a long word, I mean,
should
you
be,
just, just activate the decomposition rule again, and then try to find something meaningful around the fixation point. And okay. Okay. That was the first study. And then the second one, this is also published, a few years ago, and that has to do with reading long but novel compound words. And I'm presenting this as a sort of, because the follow-up to that, the most recent one sort of builds on this one. So, and there in the follow-up study we manipulated, the length also. So that here it was only done for the long compounds. So we basically were interested in seeing when this sort of this meaning construction begins. Where in the record you see, that there's something that when the sort of the process diverges between existing and novel compounds. So for the novel compound, so the construction of the meaning has to start out by this. So the only way you can understand these words is that you first identify the constituents and then try to combine them into something meaningful. That's the only way to do it.
You're saying there's no holistic root for those words?
Right, there's no holistic root.
Yeah.
It's purely, there's only the decomposition root. And then has to be some meaning computation also. Putting together sort of the combined meaning. So and we also manipulated so we had a set of novel compounds, a set of existing compounds, and then we manipulated the frequency of the first constituent separately for these. Sort of looking at sort of the, how strongly the sort of how strong the frequency constituent frequency effect is in comparison in between these two types of compounds. So what we did here was, we paired a low frequency first constituent compound with a high frequency first constituent separately for the existing ones and for the novel ones. So you can do it the other way around. Actually, in the follow-up experiment, we did it the other way around. But you have to make a choice. There's no way, at least we couldn't think of having sort of sets of sentence sets of 4 that would be matched across. So again, so the beginning part, before the target word was sort of short, and there was sort of neutral in meaning. It has been decided or something like that. So and here maybe I'll just translate these novel compounds and tell you a little bit more about how we came up with these So I mean this one means chess trick. So of course that would be a spaced compound in English, because I mean you never concatenate words that are not existing. And then you had this one is speed formula. This Grönroos is a rally driver. Well known in Finland. So but his last name is also very common. So if even though you have his first name in the beginning, it wouldn't prime people to start thinking of rally, because it's very. A lot of people have the same name. So but anyhow, so okay. So about the selection of novel compounds. So we what we did was, we did not trust ourselves for making them up. So or actually we did sort of make up some of them, but we wanted to get some independent evidence that it's not our mind, strange mind, that sort of can combine these. So we wanted to have somebody else also come up with that. So but rarely, so that they would be still considered a novel compound. So we wanted to have at least one occurrence in Google for that word that we used, but and the maximum that was just we thought, okay, 5, but this that would be the maximum, 5 times maximum, and that would be novel compound word. But we also did a rating study where we gave a 4-point rating scheme. So so number 1 meant, I guess, I have no clue. I have no clue what this means. 2, I think I might understand what it means. Oh, sorry, I have some clue. And then number 3, I think I know what it means. These were in isolation, no sentence context. And 4 would be I know what it means. So and the comprehension ratings for the ones that we selected was about 3. So they thought that okay, they can get to the meaning by the constituent meanings. Okay, and so we did all kinds of controls. I'm not going to go into that, so save some time and go to the data. Now I'm looking at the early effect. Using first fixation duration as the measure. What you see here is only the sort of the main effect of first constituent frequency. That the high frequency first constituents take shorter time than the low frequency constituents. There seems to be a little bit of an interaction, but no, it's not significant. But when we look at the subgrades, now we're looking at the sort of the gauge duration on the first constituent, so that the same measure we used in the prior study. So still, measuring rather early effect. So we get the main effect of first constituent frequency, but now you get this interaction that was already, coming out in the first fixation duration. Now it's reliable. So it is the effect already at this point in time is sort of, is bigger for the novel compounds than for the existing ones. And also, quite surprisingly, or maybe that's not that surprising, but anyhow, so there is also a 50 millisecond novelty effect. So which wasn't in the first fixation duration, but now this is, so it has to come from a pre-fixation round the. It can be pretty close to the morphine boundary, but still on the first constituent. So already during the second, as you like, the second fixation, they already realized that this is. Now, there's something that they have some idea that there's a novel compound, perhaps, that we need to be identified. And for the gauge duration, basically same effect, sort of the main effect of first constituent frequency, but also the interaction comes out significant, and now the novelty effect is larger than for the the subway, so it's almost like 200 milliseconds. But interesting, the next one is, I think I like this one. So what we did, we tried to look at within the first pass reading. So look at the later effect still within the first pass reading. So what we did was we subtracted from case duration the sub-case duration on the first constituent. So whatever comes after, so that there'll be fixation on the second constituent, but could be also rereading of the first. Anything after that. And that's what you see here is only pure novelty effect. Now that you get a main effect of novelty, strong effect. But now, and with the constituent frequency effect is already gone. So later, it's already you are doing this, meaning computation now.
So that's the gluing together.
Gluing together, yeah, exactly. So so the summary results, so we got an early effect of first constituent frequency, relatively early effect of novelty, so kicking in already the first constituent frequency effect bigger for novel than existing compounds, and in the latest processing stages of first pass reading, there's only a novelty effect. So what we suggested in the paper is is two-stage process for identifying novel, not long novel compounds. So the first stage you just that you have to start out with the lexical access of the constituents, and stage two you just glue them together, so the meaning composition of the novel word from the meaning of the constituents, and that's you're still fixating on the word, but that'll be toward the end, just prior to fixating away from that word. So we also reasoned that the stage two, this meaning computation, takes longer when the frequency of the first constituent is low, since low frequency constituents infrequently combine, they don't make compound words that often, so with other lexemes to form compound words. So that's why presumably the meaning computation takes a little bit longer. Okay. And this is the unpublished data that we just, we're still analyzing the data. We probably not have done the most sensitive analysis. We just done ANOVA so far. So these are preliminary data, and they might change a little bit. But I think the pattern shouldn't change. But now what we did was coming back to this short versus long compounds, but now doing it separately for the existing and novel compounds. And the starting point again was the visual acuity principle that that there would be the head start for the holistic route for the short ones, whereas there would be head start for the compositional processing for long compounds. Okay, but what it means for identifying and getting into the meaning of novel compounds, be they short or long. So, because as we already said, novel compounds, they have to be identified on the basis of the components, right? So you have to activate the decomposition route, okay? But for long ones, we're arguing that that's what you're going to activate anyhow. So it shouldn't matter that much. But for the short ones, your first try is to use the holistic route. But for the novel ones, won't work. So the idea is, okay, you get a bigger disruption effect or interference, longer processing times. Between short existing novel rather than long existing novel. That was the prediction that we wanted to test. Okay. We also manipulated, this time we manipulated, I forget why we did this, but with some interesting results on that. We have to maybe follow up. But anyhow, so we manipulated the second constituent frequency, low versus high. So we had also two word lengths, rather short and rather long, and then the two types of words existing in novel. And here again, things that the stimuli were matched. Okay. And now what we did was sort of the matching. We paired an existing compound with a novel compound. That's the other way around than what we did in the previous one. But that's, you can go either way. But we wanted to have the more sensitive manipulation or the matching within the between the two word types. So we had. So that's what we did. So these are just sort of the type, some of these sort of sentences that we used. Okay. Okay, and now we present some data for. There seems to be something going on for the first fixation duration. Maybe it's the scale that is. But anyhow, what the only significant effect what you get for the first fixation duration is sort of the main effect for word length. Overall, these short compounds are read with longer first fixations than long ones, and that's a typical finding. We find that all the time, but we found that, and I think other people find. Simply, I think it reflects the probability of making a refixation. So long ones, you almost always make a refixation. Once you make a refixation, the first one will be rather short. And for the short ones, it's more likely that you read it. With a single fixation, and that will be longer. So there's nothing deep about this. So this is sort of it's understandable, but nothing related to second constituent frequency, nothing related to the novelty. Okay. Now we're looking at the data for the gaze duration. Okay, and here we have the long ones. Here we have the short ones, and now, as you might, that's no surprise. The main effect of length, it simply takes longer to read. Longer words than short words, no surprise there. But then there's also main effect of second constituent frequency, no surprise that should be there, and also a main effect on novelty. So the novel word compounds take overall longer than the existing ones, not a surprise. Okay, but the interactions, are more interesting. And what you find here is a two-way and a three-way interaction. But the two-way interaction between word type and second constituent frequency suggests that you get as with the previous study, that you get a bigger bigger constituent frequency effect for the novel ones than the existing ones. And the three-way interaction suggests that it's particularly the case for the short ones. Here you get, actually if you do this, separately for short and long, it's the interaction. So it's, this interaction is significant, right? Okay, so it is as we predicted that you get a bigger disruption for the short novel ones. Okay. When you look at the total fixation time, even still, further later, indexing a little bit, still later effects. So now we get, we have the main effects, but practically the word type by second constituent frequency interaction is just about significant. It'll be significant when we do, I believe, when we do the proper analyses. But what it means is that there's no longer the the three-way interaction. And also, if you look at these data, so you see that now also the long ones is showing, the long novel ones are showing the bigger effect. Here the effect is something like, I forget, between something like 50 milliseconds. Here, I mean, it's more than 100, so it basically doubles. So I mean, here, I mean, for the short ones, it's even this. I mean, it's even bigger. But anyhow, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that okay. So also, I mean, it comes with a little delay for the long ones. I mean, so I mean, this bigger effect. So I mean, the constitutive frequency effect. Okay. So summary of these engaged duration and total fixation time, both short and novel compounds display a bigger constitutive frequency effect than existing compounds. And engaged duration, we also, I mean, saw that the short novel compounds displayed the biggest constitutive frequency effect. Okay. And what we conclude from these, I mean, is, I mean, that okay. Again, as we saw in the previous, I mean, study also, that the computation of the meaning of the novel words, it seems to be pretty immediate. It's sort of like, it starts out, I mean, quite early. And the signs, I mean, some signs of meaning composition based on constituent meanings appear earlier and are more robust for short novel compounds. And that's sort of presumably, and that was sort of the theorizing we had, because the holistic rule is a default for processing short compounds, and they have to switch, and they realize at some point, okay, it doesn't compute. I mean, I don't have any entry for this. Okay, let's start over, use the other route, so to speak. Okay. And for long novel compounds, the meaning composition takes place with some delay. When I mean. And that's sort of, I mean, this is suggested by the interaction really coming out, I mean, significant in the total fixation time. So here, I mean, and this is the last piece of data that I'm showing you, just plotting the gauge duration only for the long ones. This is the price of the existing study, and this is sort of the new study. And basically, what I'm trying to show you here, that you get this. I mean, here you get this novelty by constituent frequency effect clearly significant. I mean, here it wasn't. It was. I mean, it was sort of coming out in the total fixation time. But it's sort of like understandable that that the novelty effect kicks in later when we're manipulating the second constituent frequency. That's the head of the noun, sort of giving the meaning. The first one is the modifier that modifies the head. So I mean, it sort of like I think it makes sense. Okay, so this is my last slide. So general conclusions out of these three experiments. So the hyphen and the novel compound word studies provide further evidence in support of the view that word length modifies the balance between holistic and compositional processing during compound word identification. And secondly, about the meaning computation for novel compounds. So this, of course, has to be. The meaning has to be constructed from the component meanings, and we've shown that the process takes more time when the component is low frequency, and that is because we think that first it takes longer to access the low frequency constituent, and secondly, a low frequency lexeme infrequently combines with other lexemes to make up compound words. Okay, thanks.